Thank you very much for inviting me here to EUNIC and to the Swiss Embassy to making this possible. For me, as a director of Cabaret Voltaire, birthplace of Dada, it is a great honor to be here to commemorate 1914 and to try and explore the war's legacy. It is also nice to be the last one speaking, so we can give Dada the last word of this conference. I hope this is a good step into the future. In my talk, I would like to focus on the birth of Dada in Zurich, and this has various reasons, because Dada in Berlin and Paris only happened later, in 1918, after the First World War, and Dada in New York, which can be traced back as far as 1913, when Marcel Duchamp showed his Nu descendant en escalier in New York's Armory Show, wasn't really affected directly by the circumstances of the First World War. Except for Arthur Cravan, boxer and poet, nephew of Oscar Wilde, who was afraid in 1917 to be drafted for military service and therefore flew all the way to Newfoundland and then to Mexico. Usually, when we in Cabaret Voltaire try to explain Dada in one sentence, which is of course impossible, we say, Dada was an art movement which protested against the First World War. This sounds quite reasonable to most of the people, even to me. So I actually never really questioned this sentence until now as a preparation for this conference. I wanted to find some direct evidence of this protest, some quotes, statements, and even manifestos from Dadaists that are clearly against the First World War. When Cabaret Voltaire opened on the 5th of February 1916, the First World War was already at its peak and shortly before the Battle of Verdun. So we have to look at the Dadaists before they actually became Dadaists and before they were even in Zurich. Only a few of them actually wrote something about their position towards the First World War. We have Hugo Ball, the founder of Cabaret Voltaire, for example, was an extensive chronologist of his time. In his diary, which was published in 1927, Flight Out of Time, Die Flucht aus der Zeit, he protocoled most of his thoughts and actions. And his colleague Hans Arp, another founder of Cabaret Voltaire, wrote that Flight Out of Time is a philosophical and religious diary in which the essential sentences about Dada are written. Therefore, I allow myself to quote Hugo Ball and his book as an example to talk about Dada and the First World War. On the 7th of August 1914, Hugo Ball wrote to his sister Maria that he signed in for military service and was ready to get rid of his ideas about art and theater. One motivation might be that all theaters were closed in Germany, and as many other artists in that time, especially in Germany, he saw a way to get out of the apathic situation and saw a possibility to change the world and society. In his diary, Flight Out of Time, he starts in 1913 by writing, "The world and society in 1913 looked like this. Life is completely confined and shackled. A kind of economic fatalism prevails. Each individual, whether he resists or not, is assigned a specific role, and with it, his interests and his character." And he goes on to ask, is there anywhere a force that is strong enough and above all vital enough to put an end to this state of affairs? So it might be that for a short moment, Ball was hoping for the First World War to be the force that would put an end to this state of affairs. In Flight Out of Time, he never mentions the outbreak of war. There is in fact a gap from end of July until November 1914. In November 1914, Ball is in Berlin and mentions that he is reading Kropotkin, Bakunin, and Merezhkovsky, and that he has been at the border for 2 weeks. In Dieuze, he saw the first soldier graves. and he noticed that Fort Manovier had just been shelled, and in the rubble he found a tattered Rabelais. Then he came back to Berlin. Hans Arp, who actually is originally from Elsass, where the trench warfare was taking place, mentions Hugo Ball's visit to the front. It seems that he got on a soldier's truck as a civilian and tried to get to the front lines. As the officers noticed that he is not a spy, but just an idealist, they sent him back. It might be that it is not even idealism that drove him to get to the front, but simply curiosity. He writes further, "You know, I would really like to understand, to comprehend. It is the total mass of machinery, and the devil himself has broken loose now. Ideals are only labels that have been stuck on. Everything has been shaken to its very foundations." In June 1915 in Zurich, after Fritz Haber's gas had been first used in Ypres and still before the first tanks entered the First World War, he notes, "The war is based on a crass error. Men have been mistaken for machines. Machines, not men, should be decimated. At some future date, when only the machines march, things will be better. Then everyone will be right to rejoice when they all demolish each other." And as a small sidetrack, it is remarkable to notice that at the same time Francis Picabia started with his machine drawings as portraits of friends like Alfred Stieglitz, Marius de Sayas, or Haviland in the magazine 291, number 5 to 6, where machine and men unite in one image, or where machines become men and men become machines. And in October of the same year, still in Zurich, Hugo Ball makes a silent protest against the war. Today, we would maybe call this a performance. The Black Order of the German Eagle, the Medal of Bravery, the Cross of Merit first, second, and third class, this evening I dumped all of them and my war orders too into Lake Zurich. It is my opinion that everyone has to fight in his own place. The Iron Cross can be worn on the back too. The Iron Cross can be worn on the back too. It does not have to be on the breast. A couple of days earlier, he seems to have gotten aware that he cannot leave from Zurich. Quote, "If I wanted to flee again, where could I go? Switzerland is a birdcage surrounded by roaring lions." End of quote. In the birdcage in Zurich, Ball got to know two new social circles. On the one side, he was gathering with socialists and anarchists who had meetings and held lectures on politics, and on the other side, he really got to the people, as he asked himself in October 1915. "I wonder what it means, the Russian go to the people. It can have several meanings. First, to discover the people. Second, to give the people education and get from them a new and more solid education. But it can also, third, mean the event that it is defined in the creed with the words descend into hell." Ball first descended into hell. He got to know the swamps of Zurich's Niederdorf by working and playing in cabarets. In his comments in his diary, one notices a clear turn towards this lowest level of society. He's talking a lot about drugs, prostitutes, crooks, and other almost magic and fantastic creatures like giant rats, or here Emmy Hennings as a spider. He imagines waking up one morning as a rat in bed, smoking a cigarette. In the meetings with the socialist and anarchist movements in Zurich, he notices first, quote, "I have examined myself carefully. I could never bid cows welcome, throw bombs, blow up bridges, and do away with ideas." In German, we have the word Begriffe, which is more term and statement. and do away with ideas. I am not an anarchist. Reading this, it seems quite impossible that he would ever take on sound poetry, where the key idea is to do away with terms and words and ideas and begriffe. A first turnaround was a letter from Marinetti, who sent him Parola in Libertà. He notes, quote, "They are just letters of the alphabet on a page. You can roll up such a poem like a map. The syntax has come apart. The letters are scattered and assembled again in a rough and ready way. There is no language anymore, the literary astrologers and leaders proclaim. It has to be invented all over again, this integration right in the innermost process of creation." It seems that Ball now, with the letter of Marinetti, found a tool of how to deal with the situation during the First World War. Right in his first notes, after coming back from the front line in November 1914, he points out the real reason of the war, the metaphysical disaster that has happened, at least from his German point of perspective. Kant is the arch-enemy. He started it all. With his theory of cognition, he has turned all objects of the visible world over to the understanding and to its control. He has elevated Prussian polity to the status of reason and to the categorical imperative, which makes everything subject to it. His principal maxim is, reason must be accepted a priori. You will not change that. This is the drill ground in its metaphysical potency. End of quote. A year later, after writing these thoughts on Kant and after reading Marinetti and Bakunin, after hanging out with the Zurich socialists and after having descended into the Dionysic nightlife of Zurich, in the deepest autumn days, shortly after All Saints' Day, he gets to a conclusion. Art, philosophy, music, religion, all higher endeavors are intellectualized and have become rational. The war has at least liberated the devil and given him free expression, and the devil belongs no longer to this rationalistic sphere, but to the mythological. That is why even the priests were in favor of it. The passive cohabitation of the opposites of good and evil has ceased. Spinoza and Hegel have been defeated. But nobody seems to notice it yet. Quote, end of quote. But what should one do with this conclusion? It is not just war that Ball is fighting against, but it's actually the time in which the Dadaists were living. Maybe a culmination of the last 400 years after the concept of subject came up in Renaissance, where the First World War was just a very clear statement or expression of time. Ball must have slept over this conclusion and realized the next day how to deal with it. Remove yourself as far as possible from the times in order to assess them, but do not lean so far out of the window that you fall out. Ball hereby talks about something that we in German would call Haltung, a mix of attitude but also posture. An attitude that just 2 months later led to the opening of Cabaret Voltaire. In April 1916, Ball describes the Cabaret Voltaire. Our cabaret is a geste, or a gesture. Every word that is spoken and sung here says at least this one thing, that this humiliating age has not succeeded in winning our respect. What could be respectably and impressive about it? Its cannons? Our big drums drown them. Its idealism that has long been a laughingstock in its popular and its academic edition. The grandiose slaughters and cannibalistic exploits, our spontaneous foolishness and our enthusiasm for illusion will destroy them. End of quote. It is also in April 1916 when the members of Cabaret Voltaire found the word Dada and therefore became Dadaists. In the same month, Marcel Duchamp showed his first ready-made in New York. And Arthur Craven, boxer and poet, nephew of Oscar Wilde, boxed against Jack Johnson in Barcelona. Jack Johnson is the first heavyweight champion of the world. Of course, Craven lost, but with the money he could take the transatlantic ferry to New York, where he then got to know Duchamp and Picabia, who promoted him as a personification of Dada. In June 1916, Ball gives a first definition of Dada. What we call Dada is a farce of nothingness, in which all higher questions are involved. A gladiator's gesture, a play with shabby leftovers, the death warrant of posturing morality and abundance. As the bankruptcy of ideas has stripped the human image down to its innermost layers, instincts and backgrounds are emerging in a pathological way. As no art, politics, or knowledge seems to be able to hold back this flood, the only thing left is the joke and the bloody pose. He concludes, the Dadaist fights against the agony and the death of his age. Averse to all clever retinence, he cultivates the curiosity of one who feels joy even at the most questionable forms of rebellion. He knows that the world of systems has fallen apart and that this age, with its insistence on cash payment, has opened the jumble sale of godless philosophies. Where fear and bad consciences begin for the shopkeeper, hearty laughter and gentle encouragement begin for the Dadaist. End of quote. Here again we can see that Dada is mainly a Haltung, an attitude. This idea of Haltung we can find again in the first Dada manifesto, which was presented in July 1916, written by Hugo Ball. This manifesto contains 3 propositions to spell out Dada's strategy against the times and, in this indirect way, also against the war. You can see them here. How does one achieve eternal bliss? By saying Dada. How does one become famous? By saying Dada. With a noble gesture and delicate propriety, till one goes crazy, till one loses consciousness. The first proposition, how does one achieve eternal bliss? By saying Dada, was Hugo Ball's vehemently pursued objective. It indicates a kind of verticality. You can also see how stiff and vertical Hugo Ball is standing over here, which one can see very nicely from the archaic dance of the Laban pupils, or the artistic psychic ecstasy by sound poetry in Cabaret Voltaire, up to metaphysical and spiritual asceticism that Ball later proclaimed as a rebellion against time. Dada wanted to reach down into the mystical and mythological sources of human consciousness, cutting through the different strata created by enlightenment to plumb into the depths of the magical world. The second proposition, how does one become famous by saying Dada, particularly recalls Tristan Tzara, who made Dada international and was its most talented propagandist. He corresponded, telegraphed, communicated all over the world. Dada was a global phenomenon in which anyone could become a president of the movement. After the Dada adventure in Zurich had come to an end, Dada asserted Tzara asserted that a total of 8,950 newspaper articles about Dada had been published worldwide. It also shows that Dada was a global brand. With this international word meaning yes, yes in Romanian, Russian, and Croatian, and Serbian, and Macedonian, and so on. There in German, hobby horse in French, and the tail of a cow amongst the crew Negroes, as Tzara says, it was easy to capture a global avant-garde zeitgeist. It is one of the first utterances a human being does, maybe the first step of the creation of oneself. Dada. And the third proposition, with noble gesture and delicate propriety, till one goes crazy, till one loses consciousness, is an indication of how one says Dada, as a performative act, with attitude, with noble gesture, with delicate propriety, as the world was taught by the 18th and 19th century dandies. A quote by Hugo Ball: "The adventurer is always a dilettante. He puts his trust in chance and relies on his own powers. He seeks not insights, but confirmation of superiority. If it is necessary, he risks his life, but he hopes to get away with it. It is different with the inquisitive man, the dandy. He too seeks out danger, but he does not dabble in it. He sees it as a riddle. He tries to solve it. He is led from one experience to another, not by mood, but by consistency of ideas and the logic of intellectual facts. The adventures of the dandy are the expenses of the age he lives in. The adventures of the dandy are at the expense of the age he lives in. The experience of the adventurer, on the other hand, are gratuitous and are his own affair." One could say the adventurer relies on an ideology of chance and the dandy on one of fate. Thank you.